last week's guilty verdict in the murder trial of former Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin was heralded by many as a step in the right direction for racial justice. And while Chauvin will now face the consequences for the brutal killing of George Floyd, this was not the first time that Chauvin used excessive force during his 19-year career as a police officer. In 2017, he was accused of using the same force against a 14-year-old teenager. Responding to a 911 call about a domestic assault, the minor was slow to comply with Chauvin's demands and was met with force. According to court documents, Chauvin struck the child multiple times in the head with a flashlight before applying the same type of neck restraint with his knee for 17 minutes. That's 17 minutes. As the boy and his mother pleaded with Chauvin to stop and that the boy couldn't breathe. Unfortunately, he survived. At least 3 other people of color have come forward with similar stories of excessive force at the hands and knee of Derek Chauvin. The New York Times points out that Chauvin's conduct before George Floyd led to at least 22 complaints or internal investigations, but only 1 resulted in discipline. So while Chauvin will finally have to serve time in prison for his actions, the question we need to ask is why are officers like Chauvin allowed to remain on police forces in the face of such horrendous practices? Joining me now are Mark Claxton, director of the Black Law Enforcement Alliance and a retired NYPD detective, and Michael Harriet, senior writer for The Root and the person who alerted me over the weekend to all of this background from Derek Chauvin. I will confess that I knew that he had 22 past incidents in his record, Michael, but I didn't know the specifics until I saw that in The Root. Talk to me about how egregious of a police officer this guy was.
Right. We know that he's had at least 18 complaints of force alone. We know that he's shot or been involved in 3 shootings. He shot 2 people. He killed 1 before he ever arrived to arrest George Floyd. We know this about Derek Chauvin, and he was allowed to stay on the force. He was never disciplined except once. And my point about this, right, when you see people talking about systemic racism, this is the point that we're talking about, right? It's not about one guy doing one thing to one other person on one day. It is about a system that allows a person like this to stay employed, to move up the chain of command, and to flourish in a system that brutalizes Black people. We can't forget that police officers in Minneapolis they choked someone out 370 times in the past 3 years. 60% of those people were Black in a city that is 18% Black, meaning Black people were 6 times more likely to be choked unconscious by a police officer in that city. That's the systemic part. When stuff like this happens, you wonder why this guy must be crazy to have his hands in a pocket on camera while people were looking. No, the city allowed him to get away with that year in, year out repeatedly. And so he knew what was going to happen when he got called out on it. Nothing at all. And that's why he continued to do it.
It's shocking to hear this, Mark, except that the Tamir Rice officer got in trouble at his previous place of employment as a police officer because he had some psychological evaluations that he failed. He was able to resign, probably pocket a pension, go on to Cleveland, where he then kills Tamir Rice in what looked like a jump out. It was almost like a drive-by shooting. He jumped out of the car shooting this 12-year-old kid. You can go on and on and on. Police officers who we just saw one that was busted for apparently planting evidence. It just keeps going. How are these officers, in some cases who are deadly, literally for the community, allowed to stay in their jobs for so long and collect a pension at taxpayer expense?
This is a tragically repetitious pattern, and it will continue into the near future. Listen, in every other profession, when you know better, you do better. Each profession has an opportunity to evolve, to turn better, to become better, to educate better, to train better, to select better. Not policing. Policing so mired in the muck of the toxic culture that it reflexively is stubborn and defiant and entrenched. And it will continue to be that way until we get to the point where we talk about moving away from the current structure. There's no escaping it. Realistically, we can no longer coexist. Black people can no longer coexist with this policing model.